Please rise for the posting of the colors.
Present arms.
Brayton and Owen, would you come forward, please? Brayton and Owen will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Scouts. Please be seated. I'd like to welcome you all to this year's observance of the annual Veterans Day. Take a moment to contemplate what veterans have done for you and for our country, to celebrate the accomplishments of our nation's veterans. A veteran is a person who at one time in his or her life wrote a check to the American people for an amount up to and including his or her life. That's something to think about on this Veterans Day. I have behind me some honored guests here. We have on my left our newest commissioned officer in Red Oak, Second Lieutenant Alex Selberg, United States Army. Seated next to him is our guest of honor, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Rosander, United States Army, retired. And behind me to my right is my good friend and brother Marine, the Vice Chairman of our Court of Honor, Bob Fensterman. Included among our honored guests are all veterans who are here. Could I ask the veterans to stand, please, and be recognized? Thank you. I'm going to wing it here for a moment based on some information that came to me just before the ceremony began. We have the distinct honor of having in our presence today a World War II veteran. You don't see many of those around anymore. But this is a man who served as what they call a Navy frogman, an underwater demolition team member, and that organization, Underwater Demolition Teams, was the precursor of today's Navy SEALs. Please recognize, and I'll ask you to stand if you can, Al Sands. Now, I said I was winging it, and so what often happens when you wing it is you make a mistake, which I just did. His name is not Al Sands, it's Al Hayes. I'm sorry, Al, I got that wrong. Our next event in this ceremony will be vocal music by the high school choir, Mr. Marsden. That was the Red Oak School Choir under the direction of Tim Marsden and Tara Marsden with accompaniment by Tim Marsden. I think another round of applause is in order here. That was excellent and moving and inspiring. Thank you very much. Next, we'll have the placing of the wreaths. First, the American Legion. Then the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars Auxiliary. Thank you. Please rise. Please be seated. As the Master of Ceremonies today, and as the Chairman of the Montgomery County Veterans Court of Honor, it is my distinct privilege and pleasure today to introduce to you our guest speaker. This veteran soldier has his roots here in southwest Iowa. His father coming from Stanton, his mother coming from Elliott. He was even named after a Stanton farmer. His father is a career Air Force man, so he changed residencies frequently during his formative years. He graduated from high school in Rapid City, South Dakota, and from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology with a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering. And on the day of his graduation, he was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. In an active duty career that spanned over 24 years, he served at multiple posts and in many positions, to include company commander, battalion executive officer, aide-de-camp to a commanding general, brigade adjutant, operations officer, exchange officer with the Australian Defence Force, director of engineer doctrine for the United States Army, and inspector general of the Iowa National Guard. During Operation Desert Storm, he served in Dhahran and Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. In his ample free time, he obtained a Master's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from Purdue University. After his retirement from the regular Army in 2005, he worked as a bureau chief with the Iowa Department of Human Services, retiring from that position in 2019. Today, he makes his home in rural Stanton, not far from his father's boyhood farm, with his wife, Vicki, and he continues his life of service as a Montgomery County Veteran Service Officer. And so it is that I am proud to introduce to you a dedicated professional soldier and proud patriotic American, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Rosander.
Wow, what a crowd. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, veterans. Last time I spoke on Veterans Day was on the radio because of COVID. And I shared a lot of numbers about the military with those listeners that day. When Colonel Peterson asked me to speak this year, he asked that I try to speak to the young people in the audience about veterans. And I pondered that challenge for quite a while. Well, what do you say to the younger generations about military service to our country? Well, I started by preparing a wonderful and flowing speech with lots of patriotism and dead guy quotes and so on. And then as I was looking through some old reference files, I ran across the list of things that soldiers carried with them to war. And after I read it, I had to change everything. Well, almost everything. In my time in the military, I've seen quite a few lists of this nature, but I think that this specific list shines a spotlight on what it means to serve our country in uniform. You know, once I was told that if you really want to know someone, if you really want to know who they are, look in their pockets and in their rucksack. By rucksack, I mean that's a military backpack or something like it, maybe a lot heavier. And I'm pretty sure that's why I held onto this list for so long, because it struck a chord in me. So how do you define a veteran? You look in their rucksack. You look in their pockets. You figure out what they carried. Define a veteran? Well, there are book answers, dictionaries, encyclopedias, even whole libraries and museums dedicated to veterans. But unless you, a loved one, or someone you know personally has worn the uniform, the term veteran may only be an idea in your head, but not a relied upon thought based on experience. So today, I want to try to somehow make that term veteran real for all of you. The bottom line is that every generation of soldier, sailor, Marine, coastie, or airman carried different things. Well, maybe the equipment was different, but everything else, a lot of it was the same. So we're going to try a little hands-on learning this morning because we're in a school, and that's what we should do. And to illustrate my point, we're going to do a little exercise here. And hopefully when we're done, everyone will be able to take something away from this presentation. And to make this work, I need a little help from our veterans. So get ready. Veterans, as you listen to these words, raise your hand when I read something that you carried during your time in service. And it's important that you do this. Ready? Here we go. Veterans, most of you carried pride when you wore the uniform, newfound confidence in yourselves and your unit. Raise your hands if you agree. Okay. All were models and examples to others, old and young. Not all of you veterans physically went to war, but the point is that you could have gone. You could have fought. More importantly, you could have died. Any hands? Come on, veterans. You got to help me with this. All right? All right, veterans, we'll make it a little simpler. Veterans, raise your hand if you carried a P-38 can opener or heat tabs. Yeah, of course you did. If you carried watches and dog tags, raise your hand. Come on, I know you did. If you carried insect repellent, gum, cigarettes, and Zippo lighters, raise your hand. I think you get the idea. Okay? Now I lost my place. Now, once I say something that you carried, please raise your hands. Here we go. Let's keep going. How many of you carried salt tablets, compress bandages, ponchos, Kool-Aid, and 2 or 3 canteens of water? Taking you down memory trail, isn't it? Okay. How many of you carried iodine tablets or Sterno? Okay. How many of you carried long-range patrol rations, C rations, stuff in socks, and MREs? Sure. How many carried fatigues, BDUs, jump boots, jungle boots, bush hats, flak jackets, and steel pots? How many carried an M1? How many carried an M14? How many carried an M16? Okay. Car 15, anybody? Okay. How many of you carried trip flares and claymore mines? Okay. How many of you carried machine guns, grenade launchers, shotguns, or 45 caliber pistols? How many of you carried C4 plastic explosives, an assortment of hand grenades, PRC 25 radios, knives, and machetes? That's right. Many of these veterans carried the sounds of bullets, rockets, and choppers, and sometimes the sound of silence. Some escaped the fear, but dealt with the death and damage for a very long time. Some made very hard decisions, and some just tried to survive. They carried malaria, dysentery, ringworms, and leeches. They carried the land itself as it hardened on their boots. They carried stationery, pencils, Bibles, and pictures of their loved ones, real and imagined. They carried love for people in the real world and love for one another. And more often than not, they'd say, well, it don't mean nothing. They carried memories for the most part. They carried themselves with poise and a kind of dignity. Now and then there were times when panic set in and the people cried out, or at least they wanted to, but they couldn't. They carried the traditions of the United States military and memories and images of those who served before them. They carried grief, terror, and longing, and their self-worth. They carried the soldiers' greatest fears, fear for personal failure for their team and failure to accomplish the mission. They crawled into tunnels, they walked point, they advanced under fire because it needed to be done. They were afraid of dying, but too afraid to show it. They carried the emotional baggage of men and women who might die at any moment. They carried the world on their shoulders. Most importantly, they carried each other. Now, I hope that all you young people are watching what just happened. A lot of folks went down memory lane there. Sitting in the gym this morning are some amazing men and women who have served you, all of you. In our country, the formal day of recognition for veterans and their service has its beginning much more recently than you might imagine. This day in history was first and foremost a celebration of the ending of what most people in the world, at least at that time, thought was the worst and bloodiest war in the history of mankind. And it may have been up to that point. This day was originally set aside to mark a day of remembrance for those who wore the uniform of their country during World War I and was originally called Armistice Day. The day was called Armistice Day because on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, the sounds of battle formally went silent. An armistice between the warring parties went into effect. Now, for you trivia fans, and I see you veterans doing this, that was 103 years ago, so put your shoes back on so you don't have to count. Okay? And oh, by the way, the actual treaty wasn't signed until June of 1919, about 8 months later. But the battle was over. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, at the time, proclaimed that the first Armistice Day would be held November the 11th of 1919, a year after that day. In proclaiming the holiday, he said in part, and I quote, "To us in America, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service and with gratitude for the victory." Unquote. Now, just to be clear, Veterans Day is not to be confused with Memorial Day. Veterans Day celebrates the service of all military veterans, not just those who died in service. That's what Memorial Day is for. Even before Armistice Day, there were a long line of leaders in our country who recognized a simple truth. Our veterans have been and always will be the physical embodiment of this nation for all the world to see. From the time of our country's founding, there's been a steadfast dedication by citizens and leaders of this country to recognize the importance for remembering and honoring those who have and those who continue to serve. Our forefathers knew all too well that freedom is not free. They sacrificed, cried, bled, and died so that we can enjoy the liberties of freedom. Just a few examples, a few more dead guy quotes, because I love them. George Washington, a veteran, said, and I quote, "The willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by our nation." Okay. Abraham Lincoln, a veteran. Did you know that? He's a veteran. In his second inaugural address stated in part, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us the right, let us strive on to finish the work we're in, to bind up the nation's wound, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan." Not quite 40 years later, on July 4th, 1903, in a speech to veterans at Springfield, Illinois, Theodore Roosevelt, a veteran of the Spanish-American War and a Medal of Honor recipient, stated, and I quote, "A man who is good enough to shed his blood for his country is good enough to be given a square deal afterwards. More than that, no man is entitled. Less than that, no man shall have." Just a bit more trivia. Did you know that there are 13 uniformed services? How many of you really knew that? Okay, veterans, here you get to help me again. When I call your service, please stand. The Army. The Army Reserve. The National Guard. The Navy. The Navy Reserve. The Marine Corps. The Marine Corps Reserve. The Air Force. The Air Force Reserve. The Air National Guard. The Coast Guard. The Coast Guard Reserve. Finally, anybody here from the Space Command? Number 13. Now, I would like every person in the room or within the sound of my voice that has worn the uniform of this country to stand and be recognized. Okay, veterans, that means you. Stand and be recognized, all of you. Stay standing. This isn't over yet. Now, the veterans were not alone in this. It was their families that supported them throughout. So if you have a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a grandson, or a granddaughter who served in uniform, please stand. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the strength of this country. Right there. Have a seat. Now, just because I know a little bit about the local history here, because my family comes from here, did you know that a large number of National Guard units from Iowa and across the country have deployed at least once in support of wartime operations in the Middle East? And I can tell you from firsthand knowledge that Iowa has been one of the stalwarts in the reserve force from the first days. Our young men and women who have consistently been praised for their hard work and dedication to excellence. When you want it done right, you call Iowa. They've put themselves in danger to save lives of others. I want you to be proud of those men and women. They are in every respect your hometown heroes. Currently, there are approximately 1.35 million men and women in the active component force in our country. There are also over 800,000 persons serving in the National Guard and Reserves. That's 2.15 million folks. And I hear you, I'm looking at you going, hey, that's a big number. That's a lot of rucksacks to look in. Well, yeah, it is. But consider this. The population of the United States is currently estimated to number more than 333 million people. So that means that a little more than half of 1% of the population serve in the defense of our freedoms. It's a pretty small number. Here's another way to think about it so you get it in your head. Put 1,000 people in this gym. How many people represent the people in uniform? 7. That's exactly right. In 2020, the U.S. Census Bureau estimated that there were approximately 18 million veterans of all the wars in America. Of that group of veterans, there remain only about 500,000 veterans of World War II. That group of heroes has begun their final march as we speak. Somewhere between 500 to 800 of those veterans from World War II are passing in review every day as we speak. The time to learn and talk to those men and women is quickly fading. There he is. Talk to him. What all of us must remember and to take heart is that those men and women who have taken and continue to take on the task of defending freedom for all of us deserve our recognition, our respect, and our thanks. And whether or not they saw action in a war zone or here at an armory in Iowa, every one of them gave themselves for us. And in a very real sense, as I said before, every one of them is a real hero. You know, I've been blessed to be around people my whole life who have been exemplars of service and action. My granduncle John Rosander was a World War I doughboy. My uncle Paul Carwell served in the Army in World War II on Peleliu and in the occupation force in Japan after World War II. My father Ross served in the Air Force for 22 years and then as an Air Force civilian for 23 more after that. My uncle Harold was an Army reservist. My uncle Richard was an Air Force medical technician. And my uncle Darwin, or Rosie as most people knew, he was in the Air Force in Vietnam. So for me, my own personal living definition of veteran comes down to 3 words: faith, family, and duty. Now today you've heard a lot of words and numbers, but in a very real sense, that's all they are. Only you can make this day special. How do you recognize and honor a veteran? Well, that's actually a pretty easy one. Have the courage to ask someone if they served in uniform. Look them in the eye and say thank you for their service and mean it. Take a minute and ask them about their time in uniforms. Many uniforms may not say much of anything. They may just smile. But you can never tell. They might actually start talking. And when they do, better hold on. It's going to be a wild ride. Now, I hope today, through this exercise and with the help of the veterans, you found a way to define veteran in a very personal way for you. That it's more than just a definition in a book. And once you've made that connection real in your head, you'll understand why we have Veterans Day and why it's so important. I close with a few more words from Abraham Lincoln, who said in part, "Honor to the soldier and sailor everywhere who bravely bears his country's cause." Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. May God bless all of you in this great country of ours, lest we forget.
We have here something, a commemorative thing for Colonel Rosander to help him remember, in case he starts to lose his memory anytime soon, just to help him remember how much we appreciate his being here today and sharing his thoughts with us. Thank you again, Colonel Rosander. And now, we're in for a treat. We are to be entertained by the Red Oak High School Band under the direction of Ms. Taylor Wood. Thank you, Ms. Wood, and thank you, high school band. You know, I really personally enjoyed that concert. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. It brings to my mind another famous American veteran, General Ulysses S. Grant, who was famously tone deaf. General Grant said that he knew only 2 songs. One was Yankee Doodle, the other one wasn't. Think about it, you'll get it. I want to thank all the honored guests for being here, Colonel Rosander especially. I want to thank all of you for coming, the chorus, the choir rather, the band. Thank you so much. You've contributed so much to this observance today in honor of our nation's veterans. This closes our observance, and I just want to say, as you leave here today, thank a veteran, not just today, but every day. Thanks for being here.